Saturday marks 16 years since the US invasion of Afghanistan. In 2001, then President George W. Bush accused the Afghan government of sheltering the Al-Qaeda leaders who masterminded the 9/11 attacks. That saw the beginning of the so-called War on Terror, now America's longest-running conflict. Ahead of the anniversary, hundreds of people have been protesting in the Afghan capital, Kabul, against the continued presence of US troops in the country. Demonstrators carried anti-US and anti-NATO signs saying Afghanistan has been occupied by America. This comes as the United Nations has released new figures showing an increase in casualties from the previous year.
I was praying in my house, and when I saw American helicopters, I told my wife and children to save themselves. After that, I just heard a loud noise, and then my house was destroyed. 6 people were wounded, including women and children.
They destroyed our house and our family members. Why? Americans are killing our women and children every day in Afghanistan, and they just say sorry, it was a mistake.
We were sitting in a room together, and suddenly we heard the massive bombardment of our village, and I was injured.
When the explosion happened, I was near to my uncle and cousins. American soldiers opened fire, and a bullet flew by my face. I ran and hid, and came out only hours later. My uncle and cousins were dead, so I went to the village to tell everyone.
Well, the US military has decided to relax its rules of engagement in Afghanistan, which is feared could result in greater civilian casualties. Samira Khan has the details.
President Trump announced a new strategy to the U.S.'s 16-year-long war over a month ago, which was just outlined by the Pentagon chief earlier this week.
The old rules included both rules of engagement and operating principles, included a requirement for proximity of the enemy to be engaged by our air forces. So I've removed proximity, and that in itself opens the enemy, wherever they are found, to the NATO air support.
So U.S. forces will now be fully engaged in Afghanistan, gaining authorization to launch direct offensive measures against the Taliban, previously having only defensive permissions. General Mattis also announced that the U.S. now plans to place military advisors in almost every Afghan unit.
We have got to reorganize our advisors, because those units with NATO and American advisors win, and those without them often do not win. So we're going to spread the number of units with advisors.
But how much of a shift will this really be?
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
As Commander-in-Chief, I have determined that it is in our vital national interest to send an additional 30,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan. Starting next month, we will be able to remove 10,000 of our troops from Afghanistan by the end of this year.
Is it going to require additional U.S. troops?
I do believe it will involve additional forces.
So far, it seems like every U.S. strategy in Afghanistan has failed. Now, the Taliban still controls or contests 40% of the country, and it's unclear if these new policies will make any difference at all.
Clearly, they're not learning anything from the past, but I would argue that the system that we are using to make foreign policy and national security policy is not geared to learning from the past. Of course, as everyone knows, the United States was unable to achieve the goal that it had set for itself, which was to basically put the Taliban movement on the defensive and prevent them from being able to continue their advance. Now we're seeing the United States apparently trying to do something along the same line with far fewer troops. Obviously, on the face of it, it's an absurd idea. One cannot fathom how they could imagine that they could be successful in this.